Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the backdoors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC, Golden State Media Concepts, sci-fi podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Josh Hadley. Tonight, we're going to look at some things, one thing that's really pissing me off, but then a couple of things that really kind of make me happy, sort of, and some other complaints. So, stick around for segment 4, where I'm going to show you a couple of sequels, 5 sequels, that get a bad rap and I think are actually as good, if maybe not better. Okay, I maybe saying better is stepping out of bounds, but as good, at least as good as the previous films, and they get overlooked all the time. But for right now, I want to talk about cons, because we're living in the age of COVID, where I've said this joke before, everybody's walking around like they're a Mortal Kombat ninja. And we've got the con season, San Diego Comic Con is happening right now, or it's not. It was kind of the problem. I don't like this whole virtual thing. Just cancel the damn thing, okay? This whole virtual con thing, for one, it is absolutely not the same. And I mean that in every way. Just, it doesn't work, is the thing. I don't want a virtual Comic Con. I don't want a virtual horror con. If I can't be there, then I can't be there. If you can't have it due to COVID, if you can't do it safely, then just cancel it. Like Joe Bob Briggs is still doing his How the Rednecks Saved Hollywood show, and he's doing it safely, where masks are required by everybody. They're only selling out half the stadium. Everybody has to be, I think, 2 seats apart from one another. Things like that. The meet and greet will be handled outside, and you have to use hand sanitizer. And he's making every accommodation possible to still do his show. And I saw his show pre-COVID in Milwaukee, and it was a fantastic show. Got to meet him, got to get my book autographed. Maybe in another episode we'll talk about Joe Bob Briggs. But that is something on a smaller scale. Now, Comic-Con, I actually don't think you would be able to do it with social distancing and all this. I think it would just be impossible. Yeah, how are you going to meet the people you want to meet? How are you going to, just standing in line to get an autograph, if you got to be 6 feet apart, it's going to be snaking all the way out the block. You're going to be out the building. It's ridiculous, and then of course there's going to be liability waivers. Oh, if you get COVID because you came here, well, that's not our fault. Yeah, nobody's going to sign that. But the big thing is, right now, they have, I think it was Days of the Dead. I almost said Horror Hound Weekend, but Days of the Dead is happening this week, and man, that didn't go over well. First of all, they're not enforcing social distancing. They are making people wear masks, but then they're not making sure people are wearing them. People are taking them off inside. There's lots of photos of that. They're treating it like this is a normal con, probably because it's their lifeline. They need the money from this. That this, just like your little bodega near you, all of a sudden they don't have any business. Well, they're out of business. And I think that's what's happening with Days of the Dead. I think they very unwisely decided, we are going to do this. We have to do this, or there's not going to be a Day of the Dead 2021. And maybe it's ironic that it's called Day of the Dead, because I can almost guarantee you there's going to be at least one COVID case coming out of this damn thing. But the other thing is, this whole controversy that's come out of this Day of the Dead really sickened me to my core. If you don't know what happened, one of the staffers was... Okay, I need to back up. So there was a place selling teddy bears, and one of them had Robin Williams' face on it. It was a really nice sculpt of Robin Williams' face. And they were selling these teddy bears. Fine. You know, I'm a huge Robin Williams fan. I never got to meet the man, never got to interview him, but he always came across as super nice whenever I've seen him in interviews. I've known people who've worked with him. He always seemed like he was a very nice guy. And of course, he killed himself a few years ago, you know, hanging himself. And so this guy was walking around with a t-shirt that said something like, have a sense of humor, and then he was carrying one of these Robin Williams bears, and he had a custom-made t-shirt that showed a guy being hung, and it said, hang in there. And you just go, Jesus Christ, what is wrong with you? Oh, look at me, look how edgy I am. I made a suicide joke about Robin Williams. You asshole. That's all I can say is you're an asshole. Now me, I've made lots of edgy jokes. I used to be, shock jock's not the right word, but a provocateur, let's put it that way. I've said a lot of nasty things on my Facebook, on my Twitter. I've said a lot of things that should get me canceled. If I ever get to a level where people start trolling through my old Twitters, my old tweets and my old Facebook posts, I probably will be canceled. And even I was sickened at this hang in there Robin Williams thing. And that brings up the question, one, just what the hell is wrong with you? And two, this is a very bad representation of the sci-fi, fantasy, horror, the genre. I always like to use that all-encompassing term, genre, of genre fandom. And it's people like this that give all of the ammunition to the people who hate sci-fi, who hate people like us, who, it used to be, we were nerds, you know, we were the geeks, we had the glasses taped together in the center and the pocket protectors. Now we're these edgelords or these losers that walk around with a katana sword and they're like, oh, I'm really cool. Oh, shut up. No, you're not. You're a poser. And this guy at Days of the Dead with the Robin Williams bear and the hang in there shirt, he got what he wanted, I guess. He wanted some internet infamy, and he got it. I hope it was worth it, because one, you make Day of the Dead look bad, and they were already looking bad up to this point. So being a staffer, you're making them look bad. Two, the company that made the teddy bear has had to completely disavow this thing because they need to say, hey, we did not make this shirt. We had nothing to do with this. It's hurting their business all because you had to make an edgy joke. Oh, look at that. I can joke about suicide. Shut up. Just shut up. You sicken me. And you see this all the time. You know, this whole concept of trolling. I so don't understand this. This whole, I exist solely to make other people uncomfortable. I exist solely to screw with other people. I've had that in all aspects of my life, where it's video games, writing, whatever. Like, I used to play Halo 2 and 3 online, and there were these people who seemed to only exist to ruin your game. I'm not talking about, oh, some guy killed me, some guy on the other team killed me in, Xbox Live play or something. That's not what I'm talking about. That's in the game. I'm talking about, you would have these people, because, you're teamed up with people who, you don't know these people, they're just all in the lobby, they're all over the world, these are randos. And all of a sudden, what the guy would do is he would get a rocket launcher and immediately fire it into the ground, killing all of his teammates, and then laugh maniacally and keep doing that every time you would spawn. His whole day was making sure other people can't enjoy playing Halo online. I don't understand the concept of this. I don't understand the concept of being an asshole for the sake of being an asshole. That's what I don't understand. Stop it. There's something wrong with you if you're like, oh, let's troll these people. Like, you see these Twitter accounts that are just troll Twitter accounts. Oh, I'm here to troll people. I'm here to piss people off. You know, you see this on Facebook all the time. These people that are proud. Hey, I'm going to say things on my timeline that's just here to piss you off. You don't like it, you can leave. And they don't ever have any arguments. They don't ever have a valid, hey, I liked this, I didn't like this, here's why. It's, let's see if I can piss somebody off. And I don't understand the mindset of this. I don't understand the concept of, let's see how angry I can get other people. Now, it's one thing if you hold an opinion that is maybe contrary to what most people feel, and that angers people. That happens to me all the time. Just, you know, it happens to me all the time. Most of my opinions on movies piss everybody off, but they're my genuinely heartfelt held opinions. But I kind of have a reputation of being a provocateur because of that. And that's the problem. I'm not doing it to troll people. I'm doing it because that's my thoughts. This guy at Days of the Dead was just trolling. Hey, let's make this Robin Williams bear in really bad taste, and then I'll get on the internet and everyone will be mad, and then I'll actually have a reason to wake up because I made everyone mad. It's people like this that make any kind of fandom look bad. And that's what I'm sick of, because now sci-fi fandom, horror fandom, genre fandom, it has a much higher profile than it ever did before. Because, I mean, I remember when I was in high school in the 1980s, I was made fun of constantly for being a comic book fan, knowing stuff about Star Trek and all this. And now, those are attributes. Those are things people look good on. Oh, wow, did you read the new comic book? Back then it was, look at this nerd reading a comic book, let's kick his ass. So, the profile has changed. And that's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It just has changed. And when you do something like this hang in there Robin Williams thing, you're not doing anything that's good. And I'm just sick of this. I'm not saying that everyone has to rein in their darker impulses. I'm saying just doing that. He went in knowing he was going to do that. The guy that did this, he went in knowing, saying, I'm going to be an asshole. I'm going to piss everybody off. And I'm saying, well, you succeeded. And I hope you're proud of yourself, because you are going to cause a lot of new restrictions being put on what can be sold and the perception of these things, which are already looked down upon. Yes, comic books and comic book movies and that have made kind of nerd fandom a lot more accessible to the mainstream. But at the same time, it's still not accepted. And things like this don't help. So, I guess to steal a phrase from someone online, don't be stupid. Just stop being like this. You don't have to be like this. You can be a good person. Why is it so hard to be a good person? Just enjoy your fandom, don't push it on someone else, and don't be a jerk. That's what's bothering me. And I'll end up here on the cons again. I'm hoping, hopefully COVID passes, hopefully a vaccine or something happens. I hope next year, San Diego Comic Con or New York Comic Con or any of the locals or Days of the Dead, Horror Hound Comic Con, Horror Hound horror conventions and all this, I hope these things come back. And I hope they come back strong after COVID. But right now, we can't enjoy these things. And I think you shouldn't enjoy these things. Because, okay, let me rephrase that. I don't mean you shouldn't enjoy them. I mean these things shouldn't be there. Something like Days of the Dead should have been canceled. And again, I don't agree with the virtual thing, but it should have been canceled. And I'm just sick of people that want to wreck everything that they touch. So my final thoughts on this before we go to break is just cancel all of the cons until you can handle them properly. It's the same thing with reopening movie theaters. you're not going to be able to do it right. I can guarantee you I am not going to sit and wear a mask while trying to eat popcorn and watch a movie for 2 hours. Wearing a mask for 20 minutes going to the grocery store is one thing. Wearing it for 2 hours watching a Fast and the Furious movie is just insanity, and it's not going to happen. Movie theaters cannot reopen right now, and to try is just stupid, and you're going to make things worse. I don't care if AMC is on the verge of bankruptcy. You're just going to make things worse. Knock it off. So that when we come back, I'm going to talk about a magazine that I love that you might not even realize is still in print.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
How many of you out there grew up reading Heavy Metal magazine? I know I did. Heavy Metal it's gone through a lot of different phases, but Heavy Metal was always the adult illustrated fantasy magazine. And sometimes they took that adult thing a little too far, but they're coming up on their 300th issue. And with that 300th issue, they started in 1977, I believe. I think they started right around the time Star Wars started. And the thing with Heavy Metal is they were always one of the forerunners of adult illustrated fiction. As I said, sometimes they took that adult thing a tad too far with way too much nudity, way too many copious boobies, but they also were really pushing really thought-provoking, informative, and intellectual storytelling as well between some of the more prurient aspects of Heavy Metal. And the thing with that is, Heavy Metal is one of those magazines that always seems like it's been there. My experience with the magazine was, I remember in the late 80s, I was just about to start high school, and one of my friend's older brothers had an issue lying around from like maybe 86 or 87. And I read that and I was just hooked. I was like, this is fantastic. Okay, of course, I was at that age where the female nudity was kind of intriguing. But also, man, the artwork and the stories were just something like you weren't seeing in Marvel Comics. This is stuff you weren't seeing in DC Comics. This is stuff you weren't seeing on the comic book shelf. And at this point, I was too young to really have gotten into Heavy Metal on its own because I couldn't legally buy it. But the bookstore near me, now this would be when I started in high school, the bookstore near me, when I was only maybe 13 or 14, the Book World, they would stock Heavy Metal with the comic books. So if you're going in to look for the new X-Men, there's Heavy Metal right there. For some reason, they did not consider it an adult magazine. Most places you were supposed to put it with Hustler and Playboy and Penthouse and stuff like that. It was supposed to be in the adult section. But this Book World never did that. And I remember being legally not able to buy Heavy Metal when I started buying Heavy Metal. The first issue I ever bought was in 1990, or at least cover dated 1990. And I still have that issue. It is such a fond memory of taking that home and just being like, oh my God, this is like nothing that I had read before. And heavy metal, it would have its ebbs and flows. It had some pretty dark times in the late 90s and the early 2000s where editorial just wasn't doing their job. They had some pretty garbage stories. The artwork was not the best. They also had this weird thing when it came to heavy metal of not being able to understand exactly what audience they were going for. Obviously, they were adult illustrated science fiction. It was sci-fi, but then sometimes, hey, let's go over a little bit harder and let's get some of the gore and stuff. And then, well, maybe it'll be a little bit lighter and a little bit of more of the fluffy sci-fi. But the biggest problem was content. And I don't mean content in what stories were told, how it was told. I mean, you went through this thing. In the early heavy metals, it was very much an anthology magazine. Sure, you had serials. You had stories that would go from issue to issue to issue to issue. And I'll get into the history of heavy metal in just a moment. But with heavy metal, it would be an anthology. You have anywhere between 10 and 12 stories in an issue. And that's good because, hey, I don't like story number 3. Well, I love story number 4, but I don't really like story number 8, but I love story number 9. So when you have that many stories told by that many diverse voices, you really get into, there's something in every issue. You might not like something in it, but then you will like something. But then by the 90s, by the late 90s, they got this idea of having fewer stories, but longer stories. So instead of something maybe being serialized over 5 issues for 10 pages apiece, they'll just have that whole story be in one issue. And the problem with that is, if you don't like that story, that whole issue is worthless then. Because you've got one story or 2 stories taking up the entire issue. And I didn't like that era because, like I said, in a lot of cases, they weren't bringing the goods anymore. It was kind of irritating. But heavy metal itself, especially the early issues, I'm not going to say original in the idea of something unique, but they didn't have a lot of original content. Because heavy metal started as a French magazine called Metal Hurlant, which literally translates to screaming metal or heavy metal. And the first, 10 issues, maybe 12 issues of heavy metal were taking all of those French stories and translating them into English. So that's why I'm saying they weren't technically original. They were original to us because we'd never read anything like this before. But they were basically reprints of European comic books. And then, of course, they would get some American content in there and original content and things like that. And this was the magazine in the late 70s and early 80s. Nothing could touch this. And this is what prompted Marvel Comics to do Epic Illustrated. This is what one of the, I can't remember what company put it out, but it was called Gasm. It only lasted like 4 issues, and it's like, well, I think they took the wrong aspect of the adult from heavy metal. But, and then heavy metal would have the heavy metal movie in 1980, which especially growing up around that era, when I was going through puberty, that movie played on Cinemax constantly. I remember I had a tape of it because it wasn't commercially available due to the music licensing until 1996. So all we ever had were Cinemax bootlegs. And I just absolutely loved the movie. And then, of course, a really good example of what happened to heavy metal in the late 90s to the early 2000s is exactly with the movies. Like the movie, 1981, was an anthology film. And then by the time you got to Heavy Metal 2000, it was one boring story. It was like, oh boy, here we go. And then there's also the fact that the magazine, it didn't always age with its audience. For the longest time, heavy metal always seemed to be kind of poking at that 13 to 17-year-old audience. And now they've gone through some editorial changes. They've gone through some ownership changes. And like I said, they're coming up on issue 300, which is a pretty big milestone. It comes out next month or the month after that, because I think it's bi-monthly at this point. I am a subscriber, so I don't even pay attention to that. I just get an issue in the mail every now and then. But 300 is a pretty good benchmark to hit for heavy metal. My only problem with the current heavy metal is it's too theme-based. Every issue is, hey, this is our fantasy issue. This is our rock and roll issue. This is our this is our this. And again, if you don't care about whatever that base is, whatever the theme is, it's like, But heavy metal is still one of my benchmarks. Not only do I love getting it in the mail every month, although I wish they would stop with the multiple covers. They have 4 to 5 covers for every single issue, and that is annoying as hell. And for some reason, and I've always joked about this, as a subscriber, why do I always get the worst cover? Of the 4 or 5 covers you offer, it's always the ugliest, blandest one sent to subscribers. As a subscriber, shouldn't I get preferential treatment? Shouldn't I get to, if you're offering 4 covers, shouldn't I get to decide, hey, that's the cover I want? The contents are all the same. Why can't I get the cover that I want for this as a subscriber? But that's non-material to what I'm actually talking about here. But I've written for many comic books. I've written a bunch of comic books for various small publishers, and heavy metal, along with 2000 AD in England, are my bucket list. I would love to write something in heavy metal. I would love to have my name in a heavy metal comic, in a heavy metal story. That's always been a dream of mine, is to get into heavy metal. And I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I still love the magazine. And I love the brand. I've got the action figures. I've got a bunch of different heavy metal t-shirts. I've got the movies. I've got a couple of original posters. I've got almost every issue. I know I'm maybe missing some from the mid-90s. Otherwise, I've got, there's a couple of 80s issues I'm missing. But I've got almost everything in heavy metal. I've got almost every issue, as well as all of the myriad of specials that they put out. That was another thing. In the late 90s, I don't know if this was we're trying to stay afloat because they were in some financial problems after Kevin Eastman of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles bought the magazine, that they would put out their regular issue, which would either be quarterly or bi-monthly at that point, and then they would put out like 4 or 5 specials over the year. And I just thought, instead of all these special issues, why not just put the comic out every month? I don't understand, because the special issues were usually not special. They just felt like a regular issue. They just didn't have the numbering, and they were harder to find because they were the fall special, or they were the summer spectacular. I never understood why you didn't just put those out as issues. It just never made sense to me. But I'm curious, how many of you out there grew up reading heavy metal? Or if you're younger, maybe just haven't checked out a heavy metal issue. Because right now they're putting out some really good stuff. As much as I might complain about the themes, there's a lot of great content coming out. Now, every issue, is it a slam bang? No. But in general, I really enjoy a lot of what heavy metal is putting out. Like a couple of years ago, Grant Morrison took over the editorial reins. I think he's left at this point, but he took over. And then there was the controversy of all the people quitting heavy metal because of some intellectual property issues. That doesn't help things. And now they've got a new owner who I'm a little bit weary of, because his whole thing is about brand integration. And he's all about, well, we need to integrate Heavy Metal Magazine with these rock bands I know. And like a theme issue that they did recently that I didn't like, but conceptually it was a great idea. It was, we're going to get our writers and artists to take a song by Ministry, Motley Crue, Iron Maiden, something like that, and we're going to turn that song into like a 12-page story for heavy metal. Conceptually, that's actually a really good idea. I think that's a fantastic idea, and there's a lot of things you really could do with that. When it actually came out, I wasn't as happy with it. A lot of them just maybe took the title and just went off on their own. And it was like, yeah, but there's really nothing from the song in this. There's not the themes. There's not the story of the song. It just seems like it was all surface. And I'm hoping that's not what heavy metal's future is going to be. But the legacy of heavy metal to me, that iconic logo, when they were still part of National Lampoon with the logo with the Y falling off. That will always bring back happy memories to me. I love wearing a heavy metal t-shirt. I did some extras for Arrow Entertainment on one of their Blu-rays, and I didn't even realize it when I did the on-camera extras. I'm wearing a heavy metal t-shirt with the logo on it. I didn't even realize I did that at the time, but it's like, oh, yeah, my love for heavy metal. I did a thing on Star Trek's anniversary a couple of years ago for the news, and I was wearing a different heavy metal shirt. I just wear these because this is my brand, man. Heavy metal was my youth. It was my childhood. And with them coming up on issue 300, man, it's amazing that they've been around my entire lifetime, and they're only up to issue 300. But again, with all those dozens and dozens of specials they would release every year, they're probably all closer to 500. But with issue 300 coming up, I think people should go and check them out. And I'm not getting paid for this. I don't work for the company. I want to, but I'm not getting paid for this. So when I say heavy metal is better right now than it has been in about I don't want to say in a decade, because the Grant Morrison stuff was good, but the last 3 years of Heavy Metal Magazine have been better than it has been since the mid-1990s. And I think the fact that heavy metal is still being printed and still exists is a huge boon to not only the magazine itself, but to the people that run it. And I hope they don't end up running it into the ground. Like I said, there was the controversy a couple of months ago about the intellectual property issues, and they had most of their staff quit. So we'll see what happens. But Heavy Metal Magazine is something worth checking out. Now, when we come back, I'll be yapping about some more stuff, and then in segment 4, we'll talk about some sequels that you overlook because they're sequels, really.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Video games. We all play video games. I don't think there's anybody out there who doesn't play video games. Whether you don't have to be a gamer. I hate that term. Oh, I'm a gamer. Or even worse, I'm a gamer girl. You got that new trailer for that gamer girl game that, oh my god, that... Alright, we'll leave that aside. Everybody plays video games. Everybody. Whether you're just playing a mobile game while you're on the toilet, whether you're waiting for the bus and you're playing something from King or anything like that, you all play video games. We all play video games. Now, I'm older than probably the majority of the audience listening to this, and the thing is, I remember when video games, and again, I kind of hinted at this in previous segments, but I remember when being a gamer was a real stigma. Oh, you play those video games, you waste your life at the arcade. And yeah, I remember arcades. We had a great arcade here. It was called Loose Change. Unfortunately, now that name is tied to that ridiculous 9/11 documentary. Oh, documentary in quotes. But when it comes to video games, I remember when the Atari VCS came on the market. I remember going to the arcade as a kid. I remember the joy. We had an arcade and a pool hall about 4 or 5 blocks from my high school and middle school. And I remember constantly skipping school and walking to the arcade with a friend of mine, and we would spend our allowance just playing video games all day while we were supposed to be at school, and then maybe going to the pool hall across the hallway and playing some pool. We were never any good at pool, but I remember one of my favorites was Forgotten Worlds. I remember just that video game. But that whole arcade experience has been lost. The home game market, like Nintendo, didn't really kill it too bad. Nintendo sort of was an augment to the arcade experience. On the other hand, once the Sega Genesis and the SNES came out, that was a little bit more, and then once the PlayStation came out, the Xbox came out, it was all over. Arcades couldn't compete anymore. The graphics had finally caught up, the gameplay had finally caught up. I mean, obviously, an arcade cabinet is going to have better graphics than anything an Xbox could do at the time. Now, like a 360 or an Xbone can do better than something that SNK would have put out. But at the time, the arcade still had better graphics, but again, you're plunking quarters into these things. Or 50 cents on a lot of these. So a lot of them, especially if they were a fighting game, you were plunking 50 cents a piece in. But the thing is, the arcade experience might have been gone. What was it that made the home experience, that made video games take off the way they did? Because even in the Nintendo era, you would have people who, I'm not a gamer, but I play Mario. Okay, that's fine. You know, lots of people do that. And then, of course, Sega did the whole Sega does what Nintendo don't, and they had this sort of attitude thing, which I do kind of miss. It really does hurt now seeing most Sega brands as part of Nintendo. That really bugs me. Sonic and Mario should not be partners. They should be murdering one another. But it was really, to me, when the Xbox and the PlayStation came out, that everything seemed to change. And I don't know what exactly that was in the cultural zeitgeist. I mean, at that point, around 1995, things in culture were changing. And, you know, this was still part of that extreme era that, with the Mountain Dew and everybody was skateboarding and snowboarding and all that nonsense. But what it really came down to was, I think the culture of video games had changed in itself. Video games were always, I don't want to say an adult media, because obviously with the cartoony graphics and the repetitive gameplay, a child can enjoy these just as well. But when you look at games like Rostin or Forgotten Worlds or things like that, these were not made for kids. Video games always had this childlike connotation to them that I never understood. That, oh, these are for kids. No, I get it. When you have something like Nintendo, you have Mario with the overly bright, overly large sprites, and then of course all the kids wearing Mario, and the Super Mario Brothers Super Show. It's hard to say. And all that. It very much, with the Nintendo, it had a children's connotation to it. It was, well, adults can play these, but these are games for children. Then when the Sega came along, when the Master System wasn't even really an option at this point, but then when the Sega Genesis came along, that kind of had this more mature, gritty attitude that, look, we're dangerous. We're teenagers and college students play these things. And then, of course, you had even more than that. Once the PlayStation came out, it almost, I don't know if edginess is the right word to use. It had almost I can't even think of what word I want here. It's hard to describe, especially if you weren't there when all this stuff came out. It had like a world weariness to it, like a real pushing the future forward. Now, personally, I was not a fan of the PlayStation. I can't stand polygon graphics. I saw these people going nuts over Virtua Fighter and Rogue Squadron, and I'm like, these look hideous. They look like 3-year-olds drew these. Giant polygons are not good looking. Oh, you got the 3 dimensions. Big deal. You go to any Genesis game, it looks better on a graphical level than a PlayStation game does, a PS1 game. So I always had a problem with that. But now, games are these multi-billion-dollar things. I mean, they'll literally spend billions of dollars developing a game, marketing a game, putting it out there. Just to think, even taking inflation into account, Nintendo or Genesis in, say, 89 to 91, spending the equivalent amount of money to push a video game is asinine. And I don't know how video games became the giant that they became. That's what really shocks me, is how did we get to this point? And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying, how did we get to this point? How did video games become equal to, if not maybe larger than movies? Because the way I look at it is, a video game nowadays, if it's made right, and I'm not talking FMV, I'm not talking Gamer Girl or something like that where it's using actual movie style footage. Playing a video game properly, or a properly made video game, now feels like you're playing a movie, or at least it should. I remember when I started playing like Halo 4 when that came out. You feel like you're playing a movie. You've got the emotions, you've got the acts, you've got everything that a movie would give you, but you're in control. And if you think about it, it's amazing that that's always what video games promise us. You're in control. You're in control of your own story. And in a way, you are now. Now, obviously, one of my favorite games ever, franchises, I should say, is the Saints Row games. It's so just beep insanity that I love the Saints Row games. Now, you don't feel like you're playing a movie there, but there are a lot more cinematic games, like when you're playing Alien Isolation, besides how cheap it gets at times, killing me while I'm in a save, while I'm literally saving the game, that's some cheap crap, man. But you feel like you're in a movie. And I think that, along with the increased technology, might be why video games took off the way they did. And I just find it kind of weird that being a gamer is now a thing. I also find it really weird, this whole Twitch thing. I don't get into this whole streaming thing, this whole Twitch thing. To me, it boggles my mind that more people by a long shot will watch some nerd play NBA 2019 on Twitch than will actually watch an NBA game on TV. That more people are watching someone play virtual football than actually watch football. That boggles my mind. And that might be a testament to just how big video games have gotten. That there are people out there on Twitch, and I'm not talking the thoughts and stuff, but there are people out there on Twitch who make millions of dollars a month playing video games. That boggles my mind. And no, it's not jealousy. It's not, oh, I wish I could do that. I don't want to do that. But it boggles my mind that they can do that. Because I remember where video games came from. I remember when my son was really, really little. This would be in the mid to late 90s. When my son was little, I don't remember what game I was playing. Or this was more the later 90s, actually. I don't remember what video game I was playing. I was playing like one of those Atari flashback kind of things where you just like plug the Atari controller in and it's got all the games built in. And he said, "Ugh, Dad, I've got better graphics on my phone." And that kind of hurt, because I remember when the Atari VCS came out, we were just knocked on our ass about Yar's Revenge. Do you know how amazing that looked for that era? Say what you want about an insanely difficult and an obtuse game like the Atari VCS Raiders of the Lost Ark. That game was so complex and looked amazing for the time it came out. Can you say the same thing about Virtua Fighter? Can you say the same thing about Star Fox? Those were ugly games. Extremely ugly games. So, how did we get here? That's the question I'm going to keep posing to you people. How did we get here with video games? How did we get to the point where a video game is more important and more impactful than a movie? I mean, you don't see a new movie coming out. Otherwise, maybe something like Endgame or something like that, a real big deal tentpole movie. But how many sci-fi movies do you see come out that everybody has to go see right away, and they're willing to call into work, and they're willing to quit their job, and they're willing to ditch their girlfriend for a weekend to go see? On the other hand, every time a new Call of Duty game comes out or a Medal of Honor game comes out, that's exactly what happens. All of a sudden, every business in America has mass call-ins. Girlfriends' phone calls go unanswered because there is a Call of Duty game out right now. So that right there is a testament to how I think video games are very quickly becoming the pop culture medium to go to. And that is the dangerous part of this whole thing. I don't mean dangerous in a bad way. I mean, movies and TV have to step up their game because it's a dangerous era right now. Because right now, especially in the era of COVID, you can't accurately film a movie or a TV show right now. You know what you can do? You can make a video game. You can have a bunch of people coded into a room. I think video games, especially in the age of COVID, are strangely going to be the wave of the future. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but I think it's going to be what happens. And that said, I don't know what the future is going to hold for this. I don't know where this is all going. So, I mean, are we going to get to a tipping point where video games just spend too much money, that you can't just keep spending $1 billion on this? Because, I mean, movies, that's a whole different discussion. I think they're already at that tipping point where they're spending $500 million on a single movie, which to me is just pure insanity. That's the inmates running the asylum. I remember when Star Trek The Motion Picture came out in 1979, and that was the most expensive movie ever made at the time, at a whopping $28 million. Now, you get that for one episode of Game of Thrones, so that's a whole different discussion, though. But what it really comes down to is video games became an institution. They weren't just entertainment anymore. Video games were not just something people did, not just something losers did at home to have their avatar kill all these people. Because honestly, it is very cathartic. You've had a hard day at work, coming home and shooting somebody in the face with a shotgun is extremely cathartic. It's not that anymore. It's a whole thing now. It's its own thing. And what I love about it is it's going to either hit a tipping point or it's going to change the entire paradigm. And I don't know which I prefer. So I'm curious what you guys think. On that note, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to look at a couple of sequels that you might have discounted simply because they're sequels, but they're damn worth it.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Everybody knows most movies nowadays turn into a franchise at some point or another. And a lot of people know the whole law of diminishing returns. Oh, the sequels get worse and it gets blah, 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 blah. The original is the only good one, and. But there's a lot of really good sequels out there. Some sequels you might overlook simply because they're sequels. So here's 5 that I see constantly get crapped on, more or less just because they're sequels. And I don't understand that. These movies, I think, all hold up on their own, and they hold up as worthy sequels. You might disagree. Something like Predator 2. I'm about to commit heresy, but I think Predator 2 is better than Predator. I think it has a better story, it has better characters, it has better arcs. I mean, I love the first Predator movie, don't get me wrong. But Predator 2, well, it's dated now, set in the future of 1997, which I thought was always really weird at the time. Now, I saw this in the theater back in 1990. I was 15. I remember walking to the movie theater, because obviously I'm 15, I can't drive yet. And I remember this was also the summer of Jamaican Villains. This was also when Marked for Death came out. And I think there was at least one more thing about Jamaican Villains. It was kind of weird. But when this happened, when Predator 2 came out, this just blew me away. I loved the sort of rundown near future it was set in, the massive heat wave, the urban jungle. I remember everybody crapped on this movie. Everybody. So many people crapped on Predator 2. Oh, it's so boring in the city, and it's so dumb, and it's so... Watch the movie again. It is so good. It's actually so good in a weird way. I think the Predator kind of gets in the way of what I was enjoying. I was really enjoying this sort of Miami Vice style near future cop versus drug gang movie. And sometimes the Predator would get in the way of that. I was loving Harrigan and Bill Paxton and Maria Conchita Alonso in that. And then, Gary Busey is fantastic in this. And then the Predator shows up and you're like, oh, I wanted to see more of King Willie and all this. So Predator 2 is one of those movies everyone overlooks. They all think, oh, you go online, everybody hates Predator 2. And I don't understand it. Why? Because it wasn't the exact same movie as the first one? What did you want in a Predator film? This did everything a sequel is supposed to do. It expanded the lore. It changed the location. It didn't copy the first movie. What more do you want out of a sequel? And I actually think it would have been a no-win situation regardless. I think if the movie had basically copied the first film and just had another special forces team and maybe a different jungle in Africa or something, all of a sudden getting stalked by a predator, people would have said, oh, it's just the same movie over again. And then not doing that, they said, oh, but it's so different. This is why I hate sci-fi fans sometimes. If you do the same, if you give them what they want, they're not happy. If you don't give them what they want, they're not happy. And Predator 2 exemplifies that. So I think you should check out Predator 2. I think it is better than the first film. I think it is just an amazing follow-up that does not get not only the credit it deserves, but gets dumped on way, way, way too much. And you also have the interesting footnote of it was the first movie to ever be rated NC-17. Obviously, it wasn't released NC-17. Fox made it cut down to R. But the fact that I'm even shocked that this movie's rated R. This movie is graphic. And I can only imagine what was in the NC-17 version that we didn't get to see. But Predator 2, totally worthy sequel. Another one, let's stick to 1990 as well. RoboCop 2. Is RoboCop 2 as good as the first film? No, of course not. I'm not even going to try and make a joke that it is. The first film is an absolute masterpiece. RoboCop is almost untoppable. And that said, RoboCop 2 was a huge proposition. It was a huge risk for them to take. And again, just like with Predator 2, they didn't go the same route as the first film. And I think that angered people. And another thing is, with Frank Miller, pre-Insanity, writing the script, I don't think, maybe this was Irving Kershner's direction, or I'm not exactly sure what happened, but RoboCop 2 was written as a satire, the same as the first movie. The first RoboCop is a satire. And so is the sequel. And it doesn't come across as well as the first film. I don't think Irving Kershner was as good at satire as Paul Verhoeven was. And I think that maybe is why RoboCop 2 comes across harder. It comes across way more mean-spirited, comes across way harder, way more graphic, and way less focused than the first movie. And I think that's all by intent. But I don't think people got it. It's like when you watch The Howling 3. The first time you watch the third Howling movie, you're just like, this is stupid, until you realize, wait a minute, this movie is a satire of horror and werewolf films. This all makes sense now. And that's what RoboCop 2 is. It was a satire not only of the first movie, but of the same themes from the first movie. At the same time, it was satirizing what happened in our world, in pop culture, because of the first movie. Because of, oh, it's too violent, and what are kids gonna think, and the action figures and all this. And that's part of the problem. I don't think the satire came through, so it just comes across as a mean-spirited swipe at RoboCop fans, and that just doesn't sit well. But I think RoboCop 2, its biggest problem is it's too episodic. You can almost go in 20-minute increments where it feels like what we would now call webisodes. Every 20 minutes, it seems to shift focus, and while there is a through line, it's not as focused as the first movie. So I'll give it that. It's very episodic. It's kind of scatterbrained, but I think RoboCop 2 is a fantastic sequel that everyone overlooks, and they need to stop doing that. Another one would be 2010, the year we make contact. Now, this one's going to be a little bit harder because of the fact that I don't like Stanley Kubrick. I don't like the man's work at all, and I hate 2001: A Space Odyssey. I love 2010, the year we make contact. Maybe because I was old enough to see this one in the theater, where obviously I didn't see 2001 in the theater because I wasn't born yet. But with 2010, first you have people thinking, oh, the audacity that they would try and make a sequel to Kubrick's, in quotes, masterpiece. And then there's the fact that this one is really rooted in the 1980s Cold War with Russia. That can't be overlooked, but I think that's part of the charm. If you can put yourself in the mindset of when this movie was made and when it came out, I think it's a fantastic movie. Great characterization, a great story, a gripping story. It's a very political story, which might be one of the reasons it puts people off. The biggest problem I have with 2010 is probably the ending, and I mean the very, very end. It's a little too literal for its own good. It's a little too of a literal interpretation of the ending. But other than that, 2010 is overlooked so much, and just leave out 2001 for the moment. Just push 2001 out of your mind. Let's look at 2010, not as a sequel, but as its own individual thing. Amazing special effects, beautiful set design, fantastic moody lighting, just cast to die for with Roy Scheider and John Lithgow, Helen Mirren. The cast is just fantastic. Everything in this movie works on its own. You might think it doesn't work as a sequel to Kubrick's film, but if you can remove yourself slightly from the Cold War aesthetics of it, and the very, wow, we're not at that place anymore, if you can remove yourself from that, 2010 is a gorgeous film, and you should see it, if for no other reason than just for the fantastic visuals of this thing and the acting. That there are certain movies, like when you watch Network, you go, this is an actor's movie. And that's what 2010 is. This is an actor's movie. So stop overlooking this one just because it's a sequel. And then we get... Halloween 3 has gotten a lot more love in recent years, but for the longest time, this was the pariah of the Halloween franchise. And it is not even close to the worst in the Halloween franchise. I think it's actually the best film in the Halloween franchise. The fact that Michael Myers isn't in it might actually say something about what's wrong with the Halloween franchise. The fact that the one movie without Michael Myers in it is the best one. Because, okay, Halloween, take it or leave it. Halloween 2 was okay. Halloween 3 tried to do something really different with it. They tried to really take over this, every year we're going to make a Halloween story that's about Halloween, but Michael Myers' story is over. He got blowed up in the last movie, so did Loomis. And as much as I like Halloween 4, it's kind of goofy how they tiptoe around that. But Halloween 3 on its own, I mean, you got Tommy Lee Wallace, John Carpenter, Deborah Hill, trying to make a Nigel Neal plot of witchcraft in the modern computer age. That is just amazing. You got Tom Atkins and Stacey Nelkin and Peter O'Herlihy, Dan O'Herlihy, just killing it in the acting. You've got just the bizarre nature of using the Stonehenge crystals with computers, and then they cause portals that make kids turn into bugs, and it's dark too. It's one of those few movies where, yeah, we not only kill a kid, we're doing it on camera, and we're doing it gory too. And Halloween 3 is always crapped on as the redheaded stepchild of the Halloween franchise, and I'm saying screw that. Halloween 3 is the best film in the franchise, and if you think I'm wrong, well, you're wrong. And then finally, the most hateable thing, I mentioned this in an earlier episode, Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2. When it comes to Blair Witch 2, I think it was a genius move for them to not only continue the story, sort of, but also admit what Blair Witch in '99 had done to pop culture and worm that into the story. This was one of the few times where a sequel is a sequel not to the movie, but to what the movie did. And I think, again, fantastic acting. If you like Burn Notice, early Jeffrey Donovan here. Well, not even that early, but earlier than you might recognize him. Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2 is just an amazing film that everyone poo-poos because it's Blair Witch 2. So many people just discounted this movie before it even came out. I remember seeing this in the theater, and I just loved it. I've seen it multiple times. You do kind of have to pay attention to the dialogue a little bit. A lot of people get put off by the ending because they think the ending doesn't make sense. But if you listen to the dialogue closely earlier on, the ending makes 100% perfect sense. Film lies. Video tells the truth. Everything you see shot on 35mm is not reality. Everything you see shot on a camcorder is what's actually happening. Watch the movie again with that in mind, and you'll see a completely different film. So those are some films, I think, some sequels that I think are better than they have the reputation of. Are they better than the originals? Well, in the case of Blair Witch 2, considering I hated Blair Witch, I'll say yes. 2010, because I hated 2001, yes. Predator 2, I think it's as good as the original. RoboCop 2, no. The first film's better. Halloween 3, yes, I do think it is better. Maybe I'm committing nerd heresy, and that's 100% fine with me. But check out these films. Give them another chance if you haven't, I guess is my point here. If you haven't checked these out, do it. Give them a fair shake of just going, hey, I didn't give this a fair shake before. Let's take a look at this. So on that note, my name is Josh Hadley. I want to thank you for listening to the GSMC Sci-Fi podcast, brought to you, of course, by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask you to remember to subscribe to the show, write a nice review, because that really, really helps us. Also, if you can, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Have a good night. Check out some heavy metal magazines. Check out some sequels. Check out, stop being a jerk when you go to cons. Stop trying to be edgy. So keep one foot in the gutter, one fist in the gold. Have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.